Welcome everyone. We'll begin in a few minutes. Welcome everyone. My name is Divya Pawar and I'm a training coordinator at the Temple Small Business Development Center. We help small businesses start and grow, and we're doing this through consulting over the phone or through Zoom and with a robust calendar of training events. You are here for the food business series, sales forecasting, market sizing, gap analysis. This workshop is the fourth in the 9-part series, and it will cover options. It will cover forecasting sales, how to determine market size, and understand your gap analysis. We will also have office hours the next day of the webinar from 8:30 to 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., where you can ask specific questions to George, and I will post the link for it in the chat. For the webinar, we have all the attendees muted, and we encourage you to put your questions in the chat or Q&A. All attendees will receive the presentation and recording after the webinar. This webinar will be presented by George Latela from Tandem Associates. And with that, I will turn the floor to George.
Thank you, Divya. Welcome, everybody. As we do every week, if you could, if you're familiar with how the chat works, on your screen, either at the top or the bottom, depending on your computer, there'll be a pull down. So there's two ways you can communicate. One is through the chat, and the other is through the Q&A. So if you could go onto the chat, let's get some practice with that. And just let me know whether this is your first time, first session with us. Is this your first webinar, or if you've been to multiple webinars? That would be great. Thank you. Let's take a second here. All right, Adam, good to see you again. Hi, Diane. Stacy, good to see you again. Great. Not see you, but see your name. Kim, Shannon, great. All right, awesome. So we have a couple of first timers and a couple of multiples. Great, great, great. And I know we spoke with some of you all last week on the office hour. So we'll remind you a couple times, but tomorrow night from 6:30 till 8:30, I'm making myself available. I had some really good conversations with folks last week. So if you have specific questions that you'd like to have a really deeper discussion on, let's see, we can talk tomorrow night. As we go through tonight, though, if there's things that you need a little more clarification on, or I'm going to try to be as interactive as possible. It's kind of hard without microphones and cameras, but I will have a couple of interactive things where I'll ask you to either jump on the chat or in the Q&A as well. So please, as we go through, stop. Divya is monitoring the Q&A and the chat, and happy to expand on some conversation here. So as Divya said, this is the fourth part of our 9-part series. Next week, I will be back. We'll be talking about cost of goods, pricing your product, profit margin expectations. So for those of you that are thinking about a business, or for those of you that have already started a business and are really struggling with understanding how to price your product, especially now with some of the inflation going on, some of the supply chain issues we've had, I think that'll be a worthwhile session next week. I like to say profit's not a dirty word. So for those of you that are thinking about starting a business, we obviously have to make money to be successful. So that's what we'll be talking about next week. In a couple of weeks, my colleague Mark Plumondon will be back. He'll be talking about brand identity, packaging, and advertising. And again, even if you have an existing brand or product, that's a great session. We bring Jeff Marshall, who's one of our creative directors. He actually has been in the business for a long time, has worked on a lot of food brands. Did a lot of work for me at Tasty Cake, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So Jeff will be here in a couple of weeks with Mark. And then on August 18th, it's really centered around marketing, communication, and social media. We again have a couple of folks, in addition to Mark Plumondon, we'll have a couple of folks that actually do social media. And that'd be a great time for you to ask questions around that. Then Mark and I will be back on August 25th to talk about consumer and trade promotion, as well as we'll both be together on new product development on September 1st. So as you can see, we've kind of put together a pretty robust schedule here. For those of you that that missed the first session, the principles of food marketing session, that's kind of the session where we lay out everything. That's more like the marketing planning session that we have. I will touch on that a little bit tonight, and we touch on that in some of our other sessions as well. But we're hoping to do this again if we get funding from the government to do that. And then on September 11th, which we don't have a slide on, but I wanted to talk about a little bit, we're having our third boot camp. So if you're interested in pitching your idea, that's the day to do it. We spend a couple hours in the morning, kind of one-on-one consulting with you, helping you put your program and pitch together. And then in the afternoon, you get to present your full-blown PowerPoint or one page or just talk, whatever you want to do. Just kind of tell us what you're thinking about. And we kind of role play back and forth. So think of it as Shark Tank without any financials. That's kind of what we're hoping to do. We've had really two really good sessions on that as well. So that's coming up on September 11th. So as Divya said, the mission of SBDC really is to help you all flourish. They provide a lot of great services. So this is being provided free of charge to you. They offer free consulting. They offer one-on-one consulting. They help you find money. I know we have a couple of folks that I talked to last week that are not from the Philadelphia area. So I'm happy to talk to you tomorrow night, but I will direct you to your local SBDC for additional help. It's really an awesome resource for you. So a little bit about myself. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been in the food business for over 35 years. For those of you that are on the East Coast, I ran sales and marketing for Tasty Cake and pretty much did every sales and marketing job you could think of in a food company. So I like to say I practice what I teach. My full-time job now is professor of food marketing at St. Joseph's University. So I spend most of my time doing that, which is why we're here, because this series is really centered around food. So I like to say I practice what I teach. My partner, Mark Plamondon, really is kind of like a great tag team partner for me because his experience is around marketing communication. And again, I've said this before, for those of you old enough to remember, nobody bakes a cake as tasty as a Tasty Cake. Mark was the person behind that and the ad agency behind that. So again, we kind of tag team both these sessions. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about from a sales forecasting standpoint. I have this slide in every presentation I do, and that's really, you really need to understand, what your mission and vision is from a company's perspective. So obviously, I like to say my mission is to help you solve the problems of your customers. So tonight we're going to spend a good amount of time talking about sales forecasting. The customer's always in the center of that. So you hear me talk a lot about the customer and the consumer. But my job here is to help you flourish and succeed. I also like to say perception's reality. So we spend a lot of time in the first session on strategy, talking about how do we create value. And a big part of sales forecasting is really understanding consumer perceptions and understanding consumer attitudes and then understanding consumer actions. So a lot of what we do looks at actual data, and we try to kind of piece these data points together. So I like to say perception is reality. And what that basically means is whatever the consumer sees, the consumer believes. I also like to say wisdom equals age plus mistake. So while I think I'm really good at sales forecasting, I've never had a correct sales forecast ever in my life. Nobody gets 100.000% of the sales forecast right. So the goal here really is to get close. And you want to get as close as possible when you're trying to forecast, because the bank's going to want to have that information. Your clients are going to want to have that information. Your suppliers are going to want to have that information. So there's just a lot of people that really need to know what's going on. But I like to think I'm an old wise guy because I'm old and I made a lot of mistakes. That's how I define wisdom. So I also think there's three kinds of people: people who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who wonder what happened. And when I think about this, especially from a sales forecasting perspective, obviously somebody has to put a pencil to paper and get a calculator out or a spreadsheet and figure out what's going on. Somebody has to watch what's going on, and somebody has to ask really good questions about what's going on. Great, Laura. Yes, the slides will be available for download. Sorry about that. And if you need previous sessions, I think you need to contact SBDC. I'm sure they'll be able to accommodate. Thank you for that question, Laura. So from a planning standpoint, sales forecasting really is a big part of planning, because again, once we figure out what we're going to sell in total, then we need to figure out what we're going to sell by variety. And then we need to figure out what we're going to sell by variety, by day, by week, by month, those kinds of things. Because if we're making it in a facility, we need to schedule manufacturing, we need to schedule labor, we need to get raw materials. So again, you'll hear me talk a lot about the importance of planning, and really, really important. And the way I kind of think about planning is choices, decisions, and consequences. So we all have choices, we all make decisions, and we all should, suffer the positive and benefit from the, benefit from the positive, suffer from the negative consequences. So planning, really, really important. The other thing I like to talk about is, answering these three questions. So what, why, and how? And that's really the key to success. So when you think about things, you're going to have a lot of data points. You have to ask yourself, what does this mean? You have to come up with a reason of why you think that, and then ultimately how you're going to implement. So when we talk about this from a sales forecasting standpoint, we're going to spend a lot of time tonight talking about internal things like historical trends, but then also external things outside of our control. So we have to ask a lot of questions about what's going on outside of our control. Then we have to think about an opinion of why we think that's a positive or a negative, or how that's going to benefit or maybe possibly detract from our sales effort. And then ultimately, based on what we think is going to happen, how are we going to implement that? Again, how are we going to make products? Where are we going to make them? How are we going to ship them? Who are we going to sell them to? All those kinds of things. So this is an example. We call this the CEO model. And the reason it's called the CEO model is customers, employees, and owners. And this is basically when we teach management strategy or marketing strategy, this is what we talk about all the time. So we create value by these three stakeholders, really addressing the community and understanding the society at large. So you heard me talk about mission, my mission. We have to have a mission and vision. We perform an external analysis, which we call situation analysis, what's going on outside the company, and then what's going on inside the company. From that, we set quantifiable objectives. You'll hear me talk tonight about SMART objectives, things that we can measure. And then from that, that's when we create our strategy, we implement our strategy, we assess whether we were successful or not, and we go back and do it all over again, okay? So I always like to say marketing is a race with no finish line. This is an example of the entire marketing process. We have the 5 C's up top. I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about segmentation, target marketing, and positioning, but we spent a lot more time on that in our brand piece and also in our food marketing strategy piece. Really important to understand who you're going after, why they're important, and what you want them to think of when they hear your product or service. And then many of you that have business classes either in high school or undergrad, maybe have heard of the 4 P's of marketing. And that's product, price, promotion, and place. But ultimately, which is why we're here tonight, we have to get customers. That's called customer acquisition. We have to retain customers. That's called customer retention. And we have to develop customers. So again, we have to figure out, what do we think? We have a product, we have a service, we have an idea, maybe you have a concept. How can we figure out what the opportunity is? We're going to talk about opportunity tonight, right? Gap analysis, market sizing, and then sales forecasting. Because ultimately, if we're close on identifying what we're going to forecast, then we'll figure out, potentially how much money we can make, and then how much we reinvest, how much we take to the bank, maybe how much we pay our lenders, creditors back, things like that. Okay. So this is really the most important part. We have to get customers, keep customers, and develop customers. So when I think of how marketing creates value, again, we create value in a lot of different ways. We can do it through the product. We can do it through pricing. We can do it through communication. We can do it through availability or where people get it. When I define value, the way I define value, it's benefits received over burdens endured. What do I get and what do I have to go through to get it? So a great example, this webinar tonight is free. Although I will say, I think you're getting some really good value out of this for being free, because I'm getting paid by Temple as an example. So this costs you nothing, but if you were going out to hire a consultant or hire somebody to do that, you would have to pay them to do that. However, you're paying people for their subject matter expertise. So that's a great example. And again, maybe a little closer to home, you guys got to hang with me for an hour and a half tonight, and hopefully at the end of the hour and a half, you'll have a really good idea of how to do sales forecasting, market sizing, and gap analysis. So I also like to say people buy benefits. So if you were on the session last week, we were talking about selling. When we talk about selling, we always sell benefits, not features. People buy benefits. Many people are very comfortable talking about features. You know, if you think of buying a car, the car is this color, is this speed, has power windows, has leather seats, all those kinds of things. But ultimately, we're buying a car for other reasons. And that's what people look at, the benefits, not the features. This slide is in every presentation I do. I call this my money slide. Who you are, what you do, how you're different, and why you're better. So when we think about this from a sales forecasting standpoint, again, you all have an idea, or maybe you have a physical product. You have a great story. I'm sure you have a great story. And that's one of the things we talked about in the first couple of sessions that I think separates you is if you're a small business, an entrepreneur, and you're the face of the company, nobody can do what you're doing. So just because you're different doesn't mean you're better. And that's the key part here. So ultimately, we have to figure out what problems we solve for the trade customer if we're going to sell our product to a retailer, or the consumer if we're going to sell our product direct to the consumer. But again, the reason why sales forecasting is really important is because we really need to understand what the potential opportunity is. And then what's the likelihood that we're going to succeed and reach that number. So let's talk a little bit about economic value proposition. If you have a product or a service, consumers and customers already are comparing you to something. So in this concept of economic value proposition, there's three things you can give customers and consumers: less of something, the same of something, or more of something. And there's three things consumers give you: less of something, the same of something, or more of something. So ultimately, you need to figure out what it is that you're giving people. So the example we used a couple of weeks ago in more for more, especially around food, will be something like Starbucks. They're not giving you more coffee, right? Their 20-ounce coffee is 20 ounces. They're not giving you actual quantity, but people are willing to pay more for Starbucks for some reason. Maybe it's the badge. Maybe they feel good when they walk around with that cup. Maybe they like the taste. Maybe there's flavors they can't get in other places. So that's an example of more for more in food. When I think of less for less, I think of something like the dollar store. So if you've ever been in a dollar store, you know that you're getting something either less quantity, less quality, or both, but you're probably paying $1 or some increment of $1. So the reason why this is important is because once we figure out where our product is, and we know where our competition is, that's going to help us forecast. You'll see in a little bit how I kind of think through this. So I also like to say we are not in the food business serving people, but we are in the people business serving food. So a big part of what I think your differential advantage is that you care about the success of your product. You care about the success of your company because it's your company and it's your product. So even though we are in this technological society, I really believe relationships are and will continue to be important, personal relationships. So let's talk a little bit about some quantitative measures here. Again, if you are going to sell to a retailer, or if you're going to open up your own retail store, maybe you already have your own retail store, there's only 3 ways to drive retail. There's really only 3 ways to drive retail, okay? So when I think about that, it is starting at the bottom, somebody comes to the store and picks up something. So that's item units per item, right? Or units per trip, I'm sorry. So that's in the parentheses here. They buy something, they buy a box, they buy a bag, they buy a package. When they go to the register, or they do this online, they pay something, typically in the United States, dollars, currency. So these 2 things multiplied together get us to dollars per trip. So that means that how many dollars are people spending every time they go to a store, whether it's online or bricks and mortar. Then we multiply that times how many trips each household makes. That's called traffic, okay? That takes us up to the item buying rate, which is dollars per household. And then we say, okay, the item buying rate is $10 per household. And there are 100,000 households that buy that. So 100,000 times $10 equals $1 million. That's how we get the dollar sales. Okay. So we got to get people to come in the store. We got to get people to buy something. That's called transaction. And then we got to get people to come back and buy it over and over and over again. So 3 terms, again, if you're not familiar with these terms, we'll talk about them a little bit tonight. We spend a little more time in our other sessions on this, but this is how retailers think: basket size, loyalty, and frequency. So if you're going to sell something to a retailer that sells food, they're interested in how big the shopping cart is when your product is in the shopping cart. That's called basket size. So again, think of people that have large baskets wherever you grocery shop. Think of the people that are pushing those big baskets around the store. Typically, they either have more than one person in the household, and typically they have children, and the children can be of any age. So if you think of it as younger children, they're going to be buying diapers and baby wipes and baby food and maybe some, cereal, things like that. And if they have older kids, they're going to be buying some other, other quantities of food. But basket size is really, really, really important. And again, this is typically based on the size of the household or the number of people in the household. Loyalty. How loyal are consumers to my retail store? So maybe in the United States, there's a couple people that only shop at one specific store, but generally people have multiple stores they shop at. So retailers want to think about, can I get that person in my store instead of once a month, twice a month? Instead of once a week, twice a week. That's what loyalty is, okay? And then frequency is how often do they shop? How often do they shop in total? And how often do they shop at my store? So again, think of, somebody that is single. They might shop more frequently because they're going to be buying smaller baskets and maybe immediate consumption, a lot of immediate consumption. Where somebody who has young children may buy bigger, have a bigger basket, but shop less frequently because, she or he doesn't want to drag 3 kids out to the store. They just can't, they can't buy that much food at one time. Okay. So basket size, loyalty, and frequency are really, really important. So I like to think of it a little differently. Back on that one slide, I talked about the marketing schematic, and that's acquire, retain, and develop. So we have to sell somebody something. We have to acquire a customer. They have to come back and buy our product again. That's retention. And then we have to have them come back and buy it again and again and again and again. Acquire, retain, develop. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about segmentation, but it is really important for you to understand what kind of people are buying your product. And if you can quantify the kind of people that buy your product more than others, that's really important. So when we think about that, we think of these things called profiles, behaviors, and attitudes. So if you think of that, I call it benefits, behaviors, characteristics. There's a lot of different ways we can kind of group people into segments, but this is, a basic way to do this. So when I think of segmentation in food, I like to think of it from a behavior first. For me, behavior is really important. If we have people that are already buying our product, or if we have people that are already buying our category, then we can define them based on their behavior. For example, if you are a beer drinker and you drink a case of beer a week, I would consider that, let's say, a heavy beer drinker. If you're a beer drinker and you drink a 6-pack a week, maybe that's a medium beer drinker. And if you're a light beer drinker, not the brand light beer, but maybe only have like 1 can a week or a couple cans a month or maybe a couple cans a year, I want to understand of all the people that buy beer, which has to add up to 100%, what percentage are heavy users, what percentage are medium, and what percentage are light. If we're able to get this information, that helps identify the market sizing and really identify the opportunity. Okay, that's one way to segment customers. The second is based off of benefits. Remember, I talked about customers by benefits: convenience, quality, freshness, value. Or what people are most familiar with typically are descriptors like gender, age, education, ethnicity, location, income, where they live, those kinds of things. So the first thing we have to do is figure out how can we put people into groups that either act the same, think the same, or we can describe them. And then from that, we say, okay, this is the target market that we're going to go after. Or target market. So you can't have more than one target. And then this is what we want them to think. So when we think about targeting, we want to think about maybe how they're unique. Again, we talked about all these different ways to describe them. And then we can explain this to the customer. We can explain this to the ad agency. We can explain this to the bank. There's a lot of people we need to explain this to. And maybe one way we think about this is how big is the market? How fast is it growing? Who's the competition? Is it profitable? Is this something that I can do? Does it fit with what we're currently doing if you have a, already have a company? And then from that, and Mark's going to talk about this next week, this is really more from a communication standpoint, but we want to occupy a clear, distinct, and desirable place in the mind of the customer. So that when you hear Starbucks, Panera, Chipotle, Outback Steakhouse, Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, Breyer's Ice Cream, Tide Detergent, Coca-Cola, General Mills, Cheerios, Frito-Lay, all these brands, every time I say a brand, and I mentioned mostly national brands or international brands, each of you has your own clear, distinct, and desirable place with that brand. Maybe it's positive, maybe it's negative, maybe it's neutral. Then from that, we create something called a positioning statement. To the target market, brand X is the frame of reference. That's the point of difference. To the person cleaning up the spill, Bounty is the paper towel that is most absorbent. And again, we've talked about this before. Bounty's the quicker picker-upper. That advertising's been around for 50 years. So for those of you that missed the first session, we spent a lot of time talking about strategic planning. And I'm just going to touch very briefly on my rules of strategy, because again, I think they're really important from a sales forecasting, market sizing, and gap analysis standpoint. So the first thing we talk about strategy, we talk about leadership. Obviously, all of you guys that are on this call tonight, on this webinar, have leadership skills, or you wouldn't be taking time out, from 6:30 till 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night to try to understand sales forecasting, market sizing, gap analysis. Understand what you're good at. So this might, if you're familiar with the term core competency, this would be, what are you good at? What are you really good at? And then get and stay close to the customer, know who you're playing with, know who you're playing against. I'm going to go over some examples in a minute on these. Surprise, don't tell anybody what you're doing, right? Surprise, surprise, surprise. Focus, focus, focus. Concentrate your resources. So this is efficiency and effectiveness, right? You don't want to have 50 ideas and try to do 50 things. Come up with 2 or 3 things and do them really well. Concentrate your human resources, your financial resources, and your capital resources at the point of attack. Be mobile and advanced and secure. So what do consumers want? Consumers want relevancy, clarity, simplicity. They want a great experience. These are 4 key consumer drivers. I'm actually going to add a 5th one now, but these I think are the tried and true consumer drivers. Saves me time, saves me money, entertains me, and is good for me. And since COVID, I am going to add safety. I think we need to start talking about safety, especially with food. So again, I'm not sure where all of you are living right now, but we have some issues going on with the Delta variant, that there's some spikes. Now, the good news is, it doesn't seem like the deaths are as high as they were last year, but a lot of people are getting sick. And I think safety is going to come back and be, not that it wasn't important before in food, but I think safety is going to be a really, really important driver for consumers now too. So maybe people are willing to pay extra for home delivery. Does that save me time? Well, it saves me time from shopping. Probably doesn't save me money. Might cost me more money. I'm not sure if it entertains me, and I'm not sure it's good for me. But maybe if people define good as, I don't want to go to a store where there may be people that are going to get me sick, then yes, it's good for me. All right, so let me stop there for a second. Anybody have any questions? Please jump on the chat or the Q&A. I'm just going to pause here for a couple seconds. Any questions on that first session? Okay, great. Okay, so now we're going to spend the rest, the last hour or so really diving deep into sales forecasting, market sizing, and gap analysis. And again, please don't, if you've never done this before, many of you probably haven't done it. It's not, please don't be intimidated. It's really a simple process if you kind of check off the boxes. Okay, so what you're trying to do, especially for food products, is predict unit, packages or volume or pounds or something, however you kind of do that, depending on what you're making, and revenue for a specific period of time. Now, we're trying to figure out, again, what the opportunity is, because again, we all want to make money. We want to make profit. We want to have a long-standing company. So we need to identify whether these things are trends or fads. Now, we can make money on a fad, but we need to make sure that we're in the early part of the game, not the late part of the game, right? So that's all the more reason why we want to make sure we sales forecast. So where do we start? Well, I like to say sales forecasting is both an art and a science. There's a lot of different techniques. I'm only going to talk about a couple tonight. We're going to talk about some basic techniques, again, techniques that everybody who has a pencil and a paper and a calculator could do. Obviously, most of you guys have computers. So if you understand how to do an Excel spreadsheet, all the better, okay? So the first thing I talk about is you'd like to identify historic sales trends and results. Now, if you're just starting out and you don't have any sales trends, obviously you're not going to be able to figure that out. But the good news is there's a lot of different places where you can go and get free information on how big categories are. And sometimes you can get information on how big categories are in specific markets or with specific retailers. So that's kind of what we're talking about there. Even if you don't have data, you can kind of project based off of what other people are doing. The next thing you really need to think about, what are the positive and negative things that could affect your trends? And again, I'll give you some examples on that. And finally, you want to make a business assumption based on your research. So how do we define assumption? Well, okay, assumption is something we take for granted. It's belief without proof. It's the act of undertaking something. So if you assume, right, and we're moving forward with something based on the assumption, that's good. That's called a business assumption. If we're able to connect some data points, that's even better to be able to do that, okay? And again, once we get into some basic forecasting, I'll give you some examples of how we might use assumptions. Now, when you think about this and when you're writing your business plan, your marketing plan, your strategic plan, whatever, when you go to the bank, they're going to understand, what do you think you're going to do? How much are you going to sell? Do you know how much it costs? What do you think the trends are? Is this a seasonal product? Is this a frequently purchased product? Those kinds of things. You're going to have to, there's going to be a lot of assumptions here that you're going to have to go in. And that's why, again, if you're able to, I call connect the dots, that's really a good thing. So the first thing we want to talk about, I'm going to give you some specific examples here, is you have to look at what's happening outside the company. That's called an external scan. And you have to look at what's happening inside the company if you have that information. And then from that, you develop what we call a SWOT analysis. I'm going to show you an example of a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that's when you start your forecast. And that's when it's called an iterative process. It's always changing. It's always, you're always refining your numbers. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The key for me, these three words are really, really, really important. Anytime I do a sales forecast, I want to be rational, defendable, and conservative. So even though I am a very aggressive person, right? I'm a sales guy, right? I think I can sell anybody anything. I don't want to overshoot because I want to be rational here. I want to think about what's the best that can happen, what's the worst that can happen. What are the odds that 100% of the things I assume are going to happen? What are the odds that 0% of the things I assume are going to happen, right? So that's where we kind of start off. So you have to be able to defend your numbers. You have to be able to defend your numbers internally, within your company, with the people you're borrowing money from maybe, or if you're going to go to a bank or investors, you have to be able to defend your numbers. And I always like to say conservative. So I have a term, under promise and over deliver. This is my perceptions reality. If you think you can do a 5% increase and you tell people you're going to do a 5% increase, but you only do 4.9%, you've underwhelmed people, right? You haven't delivered the number. If you tell people you're going to do 4.8% and you do 4.9%, you've over delivered, even though you still actually did the same number. So that's why I like to say under promise and over deliver. You want to have aspirational goals for sure. Yes, I'm not saying that. But when you put those numbers down, make sure that you can hit those numbers. And next week, when we start talking about cost of sales and profit expectations, you have to be very, very, very realistic there. Because I know many of you may be investing your life savings or borrowing money from friends and family. You want to make sure that when you do this, that you're thinking through this as well as possible. All right, so let me stop there for a second. And I'd like you all to, before I even get into how we're forecasting here, go on the chat, at least where I am in Philadelphia. Outside of Philadelphia, it's been pretty hot the last couple of weeks. So let's say that we are going to sell lemonade. Think back to your childhood days. Just go on the chat and tell me some of the things you would need to know to figure out how many cups of lemonade you could potentially sell. So let's go on the chat. Let's go on the chat. All right, Shannon, yes, foot traffic, Adam, street traffic for sure. Now, what's the difference between the two? So if you live in a residential neighborhood and your neighbors see you setting a table up, maybe they'll walk out. Laura, definite, right? That's what we want to try to get, how many people might buy. Traffic temperature, speed of traffic. Caleb, yes. All right, all good stuff. So you guys are thinking the way we need to be thinking here, all right? That's exactly what we want to be doing. Okay, so I know all of you are not from the Philadelphia area, but now let's fast forward and let's think about, there is a chain of restaurants called the Landmark. I think there's about 6 or 7 restaurants in Philadelphia. Typically, you will find these near a college campus. So again, without having any information other than that picture you see on the screen, it's a bar and grill. Just jump on the chat. Why do you think one of the Landmark's objectives is, or strategies is, to open near a college? Why would a bar and grill want to open near a college? Just jump on the chat. Adam, I like it. Okay, lots of beer drinkers, you got it. All right, it's universal. Okay, now forget about COVID, right? We're going to talk about how COVID's changed everything here. But typically, so one of the things we need to know is, yes, college people like to drink alcohol for sure. College people like to socialize. Gen Z, Stacy, Gen Z definitely likes to experiment with food and drink. Fast food, bar food, grill, great. Maybe they have some TVs up, maybe they have a DJ, whatever it is, okay? All great answers, yes. But we're opening this bar up, and one of the things that we know about universities is they're not open 12 months a year. I mean, we do offer summer class, but most people go to school for 2 semesters. Generally 15 weeks in the fall and 15 weeks in the spring. So 15 plus 15 only equals 30. So when we start forecasting for a bar that's going to be near a college campus, we have to figure out, what do we think we're going to sell by week? Maybe what do we think we're going to sell by month? And then we have a decision to make. What do we do when there's nobody around? Do we just shut down? Or most colleges are located somewhere, some near some residential neighborhood or certainly within driving distance of other people. So then we have to figure out, okay, our primary target market, I talked about target markets before, are college students, but we might have to think about going after people in the neighborhood or people that are willing to drive as a secondary target market. So that's one way we think about it. Let's go back on the college students. Can anybody think about, and I'll give you the math. So let's say that regardless of the school that this is located at, there are 4,000 students total, 1,000 freshmen, 1,000 sophomores, 1,000 juniors, and 1,000 seniors. Who's more important? Is one of them more important than the other? Freshman, sophomore, junior, seniors. All right, Steph. Seniors, Shannon, freshmen, seniors, and juniors. Steph, yes, age. So let's assume, right, one of our assumptions, Adam, correct. One of our assumptions is that nobody has a fake ID, which is probably not a good assumption, but we're going to assume that nobody has a fake ID. Or we're going to assume now that most of the bars and restaurants have really good technology to figure out what the fake IDs are. So we've just narrowed our target market down from 4,000 people to people that are over the age of 21. And let's argue, for sake of argument, let's say all juniors are over 21. So instead of our target market being 4,000 people, it's now 2,000 people. And the other reason why maybe we don't want to talk to freshmen is because most universities require meal plans. So if you're not old enough to drink and your parents paid a couple $1,000 for you to have a meal plan, you're probably not going to have a lot of income to go out to a bar or restaurant for food. Forget about the alcohol. So that's one way we think about it is, again, we want to think about how many people. We want to think about, are they the right people? And then once we figure out, okay, we're going to go after juniors and seniors, then we have to start putting some assumptions on what's the likelihood that all 2,000 people are going to come to our bar? Probably 0. So then we need to think about what's a rational, defendable, and conservative number of how many people might come. And then once we get that, then we want to think about how much are they going to spend when they come. So there's a lot of moving targets here. But again, if we think of it this way, that's how we're going to be able to do the sales forecast. Okay. Let's talk about pet food. Okay, totally outside of bar and restaurant. So a lot of stuff going on in 2021 with pets. One of the trends we've seen, I'm going to talk about external trends in a minute. One of the trends we've seen really in the last 15 years are that more people have pets. We've also seen that many people treat their pets better than they treat their kids, or at least the same as that, if they had kids. Now, a lot of people don't have kids, they treat their pets like kids. Okay. So one of the trends we've seen is people spending more money on pet food, more money on pet toys, and more money on pet services. We call that premium pet food. But let's just talk about, before we get to premium, just behavior. So somewhere in America, we have data that says so many households in the United States have pets. We have that data, okay? And we know that, okay, there's 20% of the households in the United States have pets. So that's the potential of people that could walk in my door. Now, some of those people are going to come to a store, and some of those people are never going to go to a store, but they're going to make so many trips. If you remember back to that other slide, they're going to make, I don't know, 1 trip a month, 1 trip a week, some frequency to buy pet food, buy pet toys, or maybe get grooming or things like that. We also know off of historical trends how much people spend per trip. So maybe they spend $6 per trip, and maybe cat food owners buy more cat food than dog food owners. Or maybe dog food owners buy, the dry dog food, so they're buying a 25-pound bag, which might cost $30, but they're only buying that bag maybe once or twice a month, maybe, or even less. Where maybe cat food owners are spending less money, but they're buying, single serve cans or things like that. So we look at how many people we have buying, how many times they come, and how much they spend. And that's the opportunity. That's the opportunity. We're not going to get 100%, but that's where we start. So let me stop. Any questions there? Great. Okay. So now let's talk about, again, some of the softer skills all of you can do without having any data. So the first thing we talk about is the situation analysis, and that's called this external scan, which I'm going to take you through in a minute. Those are things that are happening outside the company that we cannot control. If you have data on who the customer is, if you have data on who the consumer is, it can be actual data, or I know many of you have been making, products and going and either selling door to door or selling to farmers markets or festivals or things like that. So maybe you can describe who your customer is. Maybe you actually know who your customer is. Some of you who have businesses obviously should have some kind of sales forecast. You should know how much you're collecting, even if it's total revenue. If you're accepting credit cards, you get your credit card statement. If you're taking cash, again, at a farmer's market, you should keep a list of how much you sell by day, how much you sell by item, and maybe make some notes on it was hot, it was cold, traffic was high, traffic was low, whatever. There's a lot of ways you can do this without having a lot of technology. And then again, from that, we develop a SWOT analysis. Strengths and weaknesses are internal, opportunities and threats are external. Talk about that in a minute. So you've heard me talk about this external analysis. We call it a pestle analysis. And again, this is where you can do some homework. You're going to do some reading. You're going to do some internet search. You're going to do some library searches. All this stuff is just sweat equity. You can do this from your home, from your computer, from your laptop. You don't even need to leave your house. But you can identify what are the political trends. So let's talk about that a little bit. We had a change in leadership at the top. We've actually had a change in leadership in the Senate, the House, state Democrats. So right now, the Democrats control the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. It's not 100% that they can get everything they want, but if you think that a Democratic group is going to benefit your product or service, then that's a trend you want to identify as a positive. If you think it's not, then that's a negative. If you're talking about politics at the state level, politics at the local level, these are all the things you really need to understand. Okay, I'm going to talk about legal next. I'm going to kind of jump from political to legal. So since we're talking about food products, there's a lot of regulation that goes on with food products. If you're selling fresh prepared food, if you're selling meat, seafood, produce, there's a lot of things that are regulated with that. If you're going to open up a retail store, there's certain licenses you need. There's certain inspections you need. There's certain taxes you need to pay. So this will be an example of, I always think of political and legal that kind of go together, okay? The economy. Do we think the economy is going to grow? Do we think the economy is going to shrink? Generally, when people have more disposable income in good economic times, they spend more money on food. They either buy better cuts of meat, maybe they buy more fish, maybe they go to nicer restaurants, maybe they eat out more often. They're willing to pay more for more quality, right? So we need to think about that. Got our crystal ball out here on the economic thing, and also who's the competition. Technology. Well, we're obviously Zooming tonight, so technology is really important. Regardless of income level, many people, not everybody, but many people have smartphones. Many people, regardless of their income, get their information off their phone. So technology is important. And then I'm going to kind of jump down and talk about social. Again, depending on who we're going after, what target market we're going after, younger people live on their phone. I'm saying younger people. So let's say people under the age of, 30. People under the age of 30 trust people they've never met more than they trust companies and commercials. So we need to understand what are the social trends. Yes, there's other things going on outside in social as well, which we certainly need to understand. And then the environment. The environment for food is really important because obviously most of the things we eat come from some kind of, raw material or plant or vegetable or liquid or protein source. So we need to understand what's happening with the environment. We need to understand the importance of, potential global warming. Where are we getting our food from? Is it coming on a truck across the country, or are we growing it locally? So again, back on this trend thing, younger people want to know where their food comes from. Younger people support local businesses. Not all younger people, but a lot of younger people. So this is an example, again, where you can spend a little bit of time for each of these topics, maybe creating a list of trends, macro trends. And then let's say, okay, how important is this for my business? If you are into social media, you're able to communicate with your potential customers off of your Instagram page, your website, if you have a website, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, Pinterest. I think I mentioned all of them, okay? So it's a lot cheaper today for you to create your own communication than it is to go out and hire an advertising agency to do a television commercial or a radio commercial or a billboard or something like that. So again, this one's really important. This is external. This is what's going on outside of your control, but you definitely need to understand what's going on. So here's an example of a SWOT analysis. Again, I said strengths and weaknesses are internal, opportunities and threats are external. So here's some examples. This is not an exhaustive list of things that could be strengths. You have money, you have investors, you have a strong brand, you have proprietary technology, you have great leadership, you have great distribution, you have great people. These can also be weaknesses, okay? They can also be weaknesses. What's the opportunity? So again, this is external. Maybe you're seeing something with new products. Maybe you've made some things that people really like. Maybe you're a bartender and you created this drink that everybody likes, that you did. Maybe you really understand a specific market. Maybe you're really good at distribution. Maybe you understand where to get stuff cheap. You can get your raw materials cheap so you can price your product properly. Maybe you have some kind of invention where you have a trademark or technology or patent or something like that, okay? And then you put all these together and figure out, okay, where are the threats coming? So again, nobody could have seen COVID happening. Nobody could have seen that happen. But now that we know it has happened, what's the likelihood it's going to happen again? If you're a bar or a restaurant and you had to shut down, some bars and restaurants went out of business, and some bars and restaurants decided to set up tents and do outdoor seating. And some bars and restaurants did home delivery, and some bars and restaurants turned into retail stores and something. I mean, there's a lot of different stuff going on. Now, when everything opened back up, do we go back to normal, whatever normal is, or do we say, hey, I'm no longer going to do catering, or I'm only going to do catering. I'm no longer going to do third-party delivery. I'm only going to do third-party delivery. There's a lot of different things that change potentially from that. So that's why we call this strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I like to think of this like a matrix. And when I think of a matrix, I always like to pair up strengths and opportunities for me. And that's because strengths and opportunities are positive. That's two positives. That doesn't mean we can't have successful strategies with weaknesses and opportunities, or weaknesses and threats, okay? Or strengths and threats. Doesn't mean that, but I always like to do two things. If we're good at something and it's an opportunity, we have a great chance to succeed. So again, when we think about the consumer influences, people have needs and wants. They process information differently. Remember, saves me time, saves me money, entertains me, is good for me, is safe for me. Some people are going to be motivated by needs, and some people are going to be motivated by wants. I am hungry. I need food. I want Chipotle. I need food. I want Chick-fil-A. I need food. I'm going to go to the grocery store and buy ingredients and make food. I need food. I'm going to go buy a frozen meal and stick it in the microwave. Okay? So all these things kind of influence everything that's going on. And again, We're motivated by physiological differences, safety differences, social differences, ego differences. So for those of you that had psychology in high school or college, this is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Regardless of what you look like, regardless of where you live in the world, all of us, everybody has physiological needs. Nobody can survive unless we have bread and water and sustenance. We need physiological things. Then we need safety. Now, people define safety different ways. Maybe it's shelter. Maybe it's shelter from the elements. Maybe it's shelter from other people. Maybe it's shelter from animals. And then once we get, this, and once we get this, then we're social creatures. And we keep moving up the ladder here. So again, doesn't matter who you are, where you live, there's certain things that we're motivated to do. So I always like to say, okay, maybe you can develop personas for each of your segments. And I like to think in, segments of 3. So if we have 3 different people, what does person 1 look like? What does person 2 think like? What does person 3 eat like? It doesn't have to be that way, but the personas can be a picture, a description of your best customer, maybe your second best customer, your third best customer, or your potential best customer. Think about how you would do a profile for them. So when we think of food, there's a couple ways we can sell food. We can sell food directly to people, right? Do it yourself. If we do it yourself, we can either sell online, we can create a store, or we can create bricks and mortar, or bricks and mortar would also include, going to a farmer's market or a pop-up or something like that. So you can open your own retail store, either online or bricks and mortar or both. You can go to a specialty store. An example of a specialty store in Philadelphia would be like the Bruno Brothers. Or you can go to a chain store. And this is probably where most people are familiar with this. So most of the chain stores would be places like Acme, ShopRite, 7-Eleven, Wawa, Sheetz, Quick Check, CVS, Turkey Hill, Costco, BJ's, Walmart, Sam's Club, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Aldi, Save-A-Lot, Family Dollar, all those places. That would be an example of a chain. All right, let me stop there for a second. Any questions on that? See how we're doing for time. Great, we've got about a half an hour left. Perfect. Okay. Stacy, great question. Yes, does profiling work if you have business customers? Absolutely. If you are B2B, you're definitely going to have people that are going to be better customers than others. It might not be the 80-20 rule, but generally it is the 80-20 rule. That means 20% of your customers represent 80% of your volume. And I'll give you an example with food. When I was at Tasty Cake, we probably served, I don't know, 20,000 unique customers. That would be everybody from a small mom and pop grocery store up to Walmart. So there was a lot of people in and around Philadelphia and South Jersey and Delaware that had a store. They had one store. They counted as a customer. Walmart counted as a customer. So Walmart was much more important than 500 corner stores for me at Tasty Cake. So that's how you would profile that. Typically, companies do things differently. I used to rank order my customers by sales. So we knew how much Walmart was worth, Wawa, Wegmans, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, all those places. And every week, I would look at sales by week and say, okay, just rank top to bottom. So I would, back on my rules of strategy, I would focus and concentrate my resources either on the biggest customers or the customers that had the best chance for growth. Not that I would ignore that small corner store, but I would spend more time with, let's say, Acme than a corner store. I'd spend more time with Acme than Wegmans. I would spend more time with Walmart than Target. I would spend more time with BJ's than Costco. Even though Costco is bigger than BJ's, we did more business with BJ's than we did with Costco. So yes, profiling definitely works if you have business customers. I'll give you another one. If you are thinking about the restaurant business, if you have people that come in regularly for food, whether it's, breakfast, lunch, dinner, sandwiches, whatever, they're important. That's called your turn business. Those are people that come in and get a meal. But I will tell you that if you have catering, if you do catering, catering's typically larger sales, less frequent, but larger sales. So maybe you're a business that does $5,000 a week, and $2,000 of that comes from catering, and $3,000 comes from people coming in the door and getting sandwiches. So you definitely want to know who those business people are, and you want to know who the people that spend the most are, or the people that use you most frequently. So one of the concepts I didn't have a slide on, but I'll talk about right now, is called lifetime value of the customer. If you're able to profile your business customers, and you know how long they've been with you, or you know how long they could be with you, then you're able to multiply 8 times day and figure out how important they are. Probably the best example of lifetime value from a B2B standpoint would be either cable or cell phone. So think about all of you that have a cable bill and or a cell phone bill. You probably signed a contract a million years ago. Those contracts used to be like 2-year contracts. So even though you're only paying $50 a month for your cell phone, if you signed a 2-year contract, you're actually worth $1,200 to that cell phone company. That's how they profile you. Not that Stacy spends $50 a month, but I got Stacy for $1,200. So profiling business customers, really important. Segmenting people, really important. Thank you for that question. Okay. So you guys are all the managers here. So what are some issues related to forecasting? Well, what's the purpose of the forecast? Is the purpose of the forecast to figure out whether you're going to invest in the business? Is the purpose of the forecast to see whether how many raw materials you need to buy? Is it to get funding? Is it to get money from your family? Is it to get money from the bank? What are you specifically forecasting? So again, back on that pest analysis, you can do a forecast for all those external things. How important is the past in predicting the future? Think about that with COVID. So we saw a lot of trends stop and reverse with COVID. So the question all the food companies are thinking about is, are these trends going to continue, or people want to go back to the way they were doing? What methods and what factors could change the forecast? So again, we've talked about, think about bars and restaurants that literally are still just opening back up. If the federal government, which I don't think they will do, but if a lot of the states start enforcing the mask mandate again for food companies, are we going to go back to where we were? And if we go back to where we were, how far are we going to go back to where we were? That would be an example of a factor that could change the forecast. So again, I'm going to show you this chart again here for real more simple terms. Consumer volume model. If you know the number of customers and how much they're buying, you can do a forecast. Okay, it's that simple. Here's an example without having any actual data, all information we got off the internet plus some assumptions. And I went back and looked at the 2000 census. So in 2000, there was 105 million households in the United States. We have data back then that said that the average household spent $120 per week on food. So if you multiply 52 weeks in a year times $120, the average household potential was $5,300 on grocery purchases. Back then, and this number is a lot lower now, but back then, 84% of sales from supermarkets and grocery stores were spent on food. So 84% of this number, people shopped at a supermarket or a grocery store. Back then, from the census directly, 35% of all households had children. Married and unmarried, does not matter whether you're married or not. So again, remember what I talked about before. Since supermarkets started, the best customers for supermarkets were families with children. So that's why this number is important. Now, this number is probably higher now, but back then in 2000, 58% of all households had internet, which means that 42% didn't. And this is why grocery stores still printed paper circulars, but you're not seeing a lot of paper circulars now, right? But this is why they did it. 25% said they would order groceries online if available. Again, this is before COVID, so this number is a lot higher. And then we had other things like shopping availability. So some of these were guesses and some of these were surveys. So this gets back on the assumptions. If we have a grocery store in Philadelphia, and we know that our ShopRite in Philadelphia represents 10% of the Philadelphia market, and we know that the average household spends $5,300, then ShopRite should get their fair share, which is $530 a year if they have 10% of the market. That's one way to think about it, okay? So take numbers from sources that we trust, and we're going to make some assumptions. That's one way to forecast. Let me give you another example, probably closer to home for some of you guys. So a few years ago, I did some work for this company called Elizabeth Lane. It was two local entrepreneurs happened to be next door neighbors that loved to cook. And they decided that they were going to create these simmer sauces. So they created 4 varieties of simmer sauce: lemon piccata, roasted red pepper, tiki masala, and Mediterranean tomato. And the way they designed these, I think they're all 16-ounce jars, was you would buy whichever flavor you like and buy a pound of whatever protein you like. So it would work with fish or chicken or turkey or beef. And you literally saute the meat, dump this on top, and in 20 minutes you have a restaurant quality meal. At least that's what the value proposition was, okay? So we did a SWOT analysis for them, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but we literally went through a full day session where we talked about all these different things. We did an external analysis. What's happening with social trends? What's happening with demographic trends? What's happening? So we did this pestle analysis that I talked about, okay? And just let me spend a little bit of time over here in competition. So these guys created a product that they thought was different, but we said, hey, how is this different than a pasta sauce? How is this different than a pizza sauce? Do people even know what a simmer sauce is? Are they going to think a simmer sauce is a pasta sauce? Are they going to think a simmer sauce is like barbecue sauce? So there's a lot of different things over here that we identified as potential competition. And again, you could do this as well. We had them create 3 personas, which I can't share with you, but they created 3 different people that they thought would be buyers. And then we said, what are these people looking for? Benefits, solutions to problems, convenience, health, quality, taste. Back then, gluten-free was really important. Their product was gluten-free. So here's an example of benefits and what people might like. Then we started doing, now this is where we're going to start talking about market sizing and gap analysis. We started saying, okay, and they already had this product physically developed. They were already selling this in farmers markets. They had a website set up, so they were already selling this product. So we really couldn't make any changes to the product other than maybe if we want to do a recipe thing. So we said, okay, where might this product sell? Well, they were already selling direct to consumers. So we said, well, you can definitely keep doing that. That's great marketing research. You can go through catalogs. You can go on Amazon. You can go through gift baskets. So you can sell direct to consumer for sure. And again, as we did our kind of planning with them, this is kind of where we thought they should really focus. But they wanted to play over here. They wanted to play in retail because this is where the big money was. And they specifically thought they could sell their product in grocery stores. So I'll take you through how we might do this. Again, we could figure out how many stores, where the stores are located. Again, you can get this for free on the internet. How many grocery stores, how many drug stores, how many convenience stores, how many club stores, where they're located, addresses, things like that. You can get traffic patterns from government websites, which I'm going to show you an example in a minute. So what we did was we actually went on and figured out that there were 162 co-ops, not a lot on the East Coast, but co-ops. It's like a chain, kind of a chain that the people actually own the store, okay? Probably easier for me to explain it this way. Everybody gets farmers markets. We found out in the United States back then, and we did this work about 5 years ago, there was 8,268 farmers markets. Then we figured out that of them, 4,000 were what we call sit and sell. So this would be where you go, you drive your car, you pull into a parking spot, you open up a tent, you open up a table, you sit and sell. The rest were like the farm, the roadside stands on the side. So obviously that's not where these guys wanted to sell. But we said to them, hey, go rent some space at a local farmer's market, go set up a table and go talk to people and figure out what people want, figure out what people are willing to pay. So back then we said, okay, there's 4,000 of these markets. They typically are like a Friday, Saturday, maybe a couple days a week. Maybe you're going to sell 20 jars. So what's that opportunity? Well, again, you're not going to sell 100% of the people. So what happens if you only sell 5%? So again, this is back on my rational, defendable, conservative. I have no idea whether 5% is a good number or not, but 5% is a lot better than 100%. So we looked at 3 scenarios: 5% penetration, 10% penetration, and 15%. Again, the only thing that changes here are the number of stores. It's still $20 a case, but if you look at, if we sell 20 jars, that's 25 cases a month times 4 months, that's 100 cases per store, and we get 5% of the farmers markets, the potential opportunity is $400,000. If we're able to get 15% penetration, the potential opportunity is 1.2 million. So they got really excited with this. The problem is, this only tells you what the opportunity is. This doesn't tell you how much it costs to rent the table, how much it costs to pay somebody to sit at the table, how much it costs to get the product from wherever you're going to make it to wherever the table is. So this gets back to those operating costs, which we're going to talk about next week. We talk about pricing. But just to figure out what the dollar opportunity is, this is how we would do it. We did the same thing for specialty stores. And you'll notice here, the opportunity was smaller, but we thought that the opportunity was better here because they could actually control driving the stuff to the store and delivering stuff to the store. So again, for those of you in Philadelphia, an example might be DeBruno Brothers, or maybe a corner specialty store, Reading Terminal Market, Arbor Farmers Market, those kinds of places. Okay. So yes, this is not $1.2 million, but this is $48,000 that we think is real, because we also factored in gross profit margin, which I'll talk about next week, and figured out that they could make about $20,000 a year just going to some local stores here. Okay. So our conclusion and action was they should test specialty retail and continue direct to consumer. They chose to go to grocery stores. They spent all their money getting the product on the shelf. The product did not sell. They went out of business in 6 months. So kind of that's the moral to the story. So when I talk to you all on the office hours, I'll refer back to this a little bit sometimes when I talk to you on the office hours. How we doing for time? Great, 15 minutes. All right, let's talk about Philly Food Hall. Again, I know all of you are not from Philadelphia, but I know all of you have been to a big city, I'm sure. So if you've been to New York City, you've been to Chicago, you've been to LA, you've been to Las Vegas, there is a place called Eataly, E-A-T-A-L-Y, in those 4 cities. And that would be considered a food hall. So it's a destination. You go to Eataly, and as you might expect, all the food there is from Italy. So we did some work for a group of investors that was thinking about opening up a food hall in Philadelphia. Okay. So again, if you're thinking about opening a food hall in Philadelphia, what kinds of things, jump on the chat, what kinds of things do you think we would want to know if we were opening a food hall in Center City, Philadelphia? Give me some variables. We're opening a food hall in Center City, Philadelphia. What do we need to know? Caleb, definitely. Okay, demographic of inhabitants for sure. What else do we know about big cities? I mean, people live in big cities, but people work in big cities and people travel to big cities. So we need a lot of different information, not just inhabitants, but people that live there, people that work there, and people that visit there. Let's start with that. So great, Caleb, thank you. So here, again, I got all this data for free, just took me some sweat equity. In Philadelphia, 300,000 people work in Center City. Almost 90% come from outside the city center. So people that work in Center City do not live in Center City. They're driving in from somewhere outside the city. 2/3 graduated college. Center City represents 42% of all the jobs in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a pretty big city. Greater Center City is the fastest growing neighborhood. So even though a lot of people don't live there, it was growing faster than other neighborhoods. And again, 40% of the people who live there work there. Okay, so that's not the same as this. That's a little different measurement. So 37,000 households. 61% of people have a college degree. 40% of people are under 40, followed by empty nesters. So we have people that are young and we have people that are old or older. Not a lot of kids in Center City. 70% of the people that live in Center City do not have a car. Think Uber or Lyft, okay? And again, this is before COVID. We did this work a couple of years ago. Tourism and occupancy have been rising. Highest rates of hotel occupancy Friday and Saturday night. Most of the people come from UK, China, Germany, India, France. Again, this is all different now with COVID. And we also had data on how many people attended conventions. So with just this information that I gave you here, we can make a lot of assumptions. Now, the other thing I didn't tell you was where this was potentially going to be located. So let's talk about that now. Actually, so before we do that, so now let's go on to restaurants. So we can figure out how many restaurants in Philadelphia, how many were full service, how many offered outdoor seating then, definitely a lot more now. How many bars, how many people travel for food. So Philadelphia, surprise, surprise, a big foodie city. A lot of people come for our food. 40% of all leases in Center City were Philadelphia. Now think about this stat post-COVID. I guarantee this number is not going to be 40%. I have no idea what the number is, but it's going to be less than 40%. So if we were doing an external analysis here, a couple things. On the positive side, if there's less people that are leasing, then the leases are going to come down. So it's going to cost us less money to lease a building in Philadelphia. That's great. However, let me go back to this slide. If less people live in the city, less people work in the city, and less people come to the city, maybe we don't want the rent for free, right? It all depends. So you have to be really careful. That's why I have to put both these things together, okay? And again, from a social standpoint, millennials are entering peak spending years. All right, again, how do people get around the city? 37% take public transit, 32% walk, 22% drive. Where do people shop? We had some stuff from visitors and convention center. So a lot of different things going on here. What were the trends? Fresh ingredients, restaurants doing good. Fast casual, think Panera, Chipotle, Five Guys. Great bar food and BYOB, lots of BYOBs. Vegan was hot and is hot. Latino, Mexican food, people like meat, people like vegetables. People were understanding what these food halls were. People like beer gardens, socializing, again, pre-COVID. What were the best neighborhoods? Again, now this was not research. This was from consumers saying where they like to go and eat, ranked. So Old City was 1, Kensington was 12th out of all these, okay? So then we started talking about competition. For those of you that, again, that live in Philadelphia, there's a great Whole Foods down by the Art Museum. Go check it out. They were looking at a location right around 15th and Market. So again, for those of you familiar with the city, we started thinking about, okay, if they put this food hall at 15th and Market, where else could people go? Well, Whole Foods Art Museum was definitely one. De Bruno's was one. They wouldn't go to Italy, but we told them to go look at Italy because that's what their inspiration was. They were trying to do that. Del Frisco's Steakhouse, they were talking about having, in addition to having a food hall, they were talking about selling produce. They were talking about selling meat and seafood specific to the Mediterranean. Okay, so this is going to be kind of like a Mediterranean kind of thing. So they were talking about doing things that potentially could, influence or get business from Del Frisco's, from Capital Grille. All right, so here's where the data comes in. We were able to go back and find out Italy in New York City, how big it was, 50,000 square feet. We figured out, because we saw an article on what their dollars per square feet were. So the Italy in New York City, Flatiron, was doing 75 million bucks a year. We know that, that's a fact. We also knew that the Italy in New York City had traffic counts of 19,000 people on the weekend, 15. We got this from government websites. You can actually get this for free. And then we figured out how many people were walking, and then we figured out the average dollars per person walking. That doesn't mean somebody can't take a cab to Italy or Uber or ride their bike, but we tried to come up with this number. And then we figured out, okay, how big is this location A and location B? They had two places they were looking at. We figured out what the dollars per square foot were. We figured out what the potential revenue was. And then we adjusted the revenue for traffic. So you see here, one of these had more people on the weekend and weekday and weekend. So location B had a lot more people going by it than location A. Now, location B was also more from a rent standpoint. So we needed to figure this out. But this would be how you start quantifying. And this was in a spreadsheet. Again, you have to be a little savvy how to do that. But then you can come up with a number to say, okay, is it realistic to assume that if we open a 23,000 square foot facility, that we can do $3 per person walking by? My answer was yes, because, okay, if Italy's doing $11 per person walking by, this is like almost 25%. So we're not saying we're going to do $11. We're saying we're going to do $3. This is where you kind of get back to the assumptions and rational, defendable, conservative. Again, then we figured out sales per square foot. We figured out quick serve restaurants, what their sales per square foot were, limited serve restaurants. We were able to go a little deeper into places and compare this to a McDonald's, compare this to an Applebee's, compare this to the Bruno Brothers. So we wanted to give them a look at things that were not exactly what they were talking about, but that sold fresh prepared food. And we made some assumptions. They decided not to do this. And thank God they did, because COVID hit. They had to sign a 20-year lease, so they would have been out of business. So let me stop there. Any sales or any questions? Because we're getting close to the end here. All right, great. Let me just go back and wrap this up, and then we'll give you another chance for questions. So the other way you could do this, if you're really good with spreadsheets, is to figure out, business units or product segments or retail channel. You can do this any way. This can be, in this case, it's Campbell Soup, but this is soup. This is baking a snack, which is Pepperidge Farm. This is international. That's how Campbell's looks at their business. Okay. And they obviously, Campbell's has actual numbers, so they know what each business represents. They're an $8 billion company. They know what these represent on a percentage basis. And then they're able to go back and say, for something like red and white soup, do we think that's going to grow? They actually have historical data. So if you have data, this is how you would forecast with data. Is soup going to grow? 7%, 7%, 7%. Prego and paste salsa is going to grow a little faster. V8 vegetable juice is going to grow a lot faster. And there's reasons, obviously, why they know these different categories are going to grow. But you can do it this way as well. And then within, I just broke one down. So this is Pepperidge Farm. So within baking and snack, they look at Pepperidge Farm bread, Pepperidge Farm cookies, and then they actually had a couple of other business units in here. So you'll see here that breads, back when they were doing this, breads were growing faster than cookies. Probably now, cookies are probably growing faster than breads. They looked at their business overseas, Europe, Asia, South America. So they segment it that way. They looked at food away from home, like schools and restaurants and things like that. So a lot of different ways that you can go back and look at these different things. And then next week, I'm going to kind of come back and talk about this. We'll talk about an income statement. We'll talk about pricing your product. But the reason why the sales forecast is really important is because if this number's wrong here, if that top line sales number is wrong, it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how smart your finance and accounting people are. It doesn't matter how much money you have. If you miss this number here, all these numbers don't matter. And we'll talk about that next week. All right, so I think we are at the end here, but there's a couple of slides for those of you that have time to go back and look at this. We'll talk about this more when we talk about new product opportunities. There's a couple of slides on the back here that I think will help kind of get you set. Okay. So let's talk about kind of what we talked about today. Hopefully you have some kind of scorecard, and my scorecard for you is, where are you now? Do you have a business plan? Are you thinking about a business plan? Do you have a product? That's what we're here for. That's what all these sessions are for. Where do you want to go and when? Do you want to introduce a product? Do you want to open a store? Do you want to get a food truck, a food cart? How you're going to get there is up to you, but all these webinars we've developed are really around the how, and then ultimately how you're going to determine success. Really important. Don't forget, you have to understand how to segment. We talked about segmenting based on behavior, based off of benefits, based off of descriptors. Who's the target market? And what do you want them to thinking? And we'll come back and talk about this multiple times. Please don't forget perception's reality. Never forget there's always going to be markets for somebody that likes a lot. So you don't have to be all things to all people. There's really no more markets that everybody likes a little. There's always going to be markets for goods and services somebody likes a lot. So this gets back on your differential advantage and why you can execute your product better than anybody. Don't forget your money slide, who you are, what you do, how you're different, why you're better. Understand where you fit in the economic value proposition. And again, and I think Divya put the link up here for the survey. Did you give us a survey link yet, Divya, or no? You want to do that now?
Yep. I put the survey link, office hours link, and the resources.
All right, great. So yes, please go on the chat. Again, if you fill the survey out, that'll help us make these things better the next time we do them. There's also a link on there if you haven't signed up for the office hours tomorrow night. That'll take you to the office hours. And again, I'm happy to spend as much time as you need on the phone tomorrow night, and we will actually be able to see each other. You can turn your camera on. We can see in here and have a conversation. But I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I really enjoyed doing this. I'm hoping we're helping some people here. And I'll turn it back over to Divya. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you so much, George, and thank you everyone for joining. Please fill in the survey because it is required by funders, the Small Business Administration, so that we can continue to provide no-cost webinars. A lot of people are finding this session very informative. So thank you, George, and thank you, everyone. See you.
Have a great night, everybody.